Imagine a world where God does not speak. Not for days, not for years, but for 4 whole centuries. No prophet, no sign, no warning, just silence. And yet, behind that silence, empires fall, kings rise, cultures collide, and a hidden path begins to be built. Today, you are going to walk with me through those mysterious 400 years and understand how each event, from Greek ascension to Seleucid oppression, from the Maccabean revolt to Roman rule, shaped the perfect stage for something that would change the world forever. The Old Testament ends with a phrase that sounds almost like a warning hanging in the air. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Malachi 4:6. With these words, the prophetic voice falls silent, and Israel enters a troubling period marked by a prophetic silence that would last for centuries. The people still had the temple, the priesthood, and the scriptures, but they no longer had prophets who interpreted the divine will in the face of political and spiritual crises. From this point lies itself amid a world in constant change. Under the rule of the Persian Empire, Israel maintained a measure of stability, but not autonomy. The absence of prophets created space for the rise of early internal tensions that would, over time, give birth to the groups that would shape the scene of the Gospels: Pharisees defending the oral tradition, Sadducees tied to the temple, Essenes withdrawing in pursuit of purity, and even the Zealots, who would later rise against foreign rule. Each movement attempted to answer what the silence of God meant, interpreting it in its own way, and slowly redefining Israel's spiritual identity. Yet this silence is not absence, it is preparation. Malachi does not close the Old Testament merely with a warning, but with a promise. A messenger would come before the Messiah, someone who would prepare the way for the great divine work that was approaching. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. Malachi 3:1. This expectation becomes the invisible thread running through the centuries, sustaining hope even as empires change, as the Greek Empire advances with its Hellenism, as the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans rise later, and even as the rigid Roman Empire eventually takes control. Everything begins here. A waiting people, a pending prophecy, and a silence preparing the fullness of time. But before this messenger could arise, the world still needed to undergo profound transformations. Under the Persian Empire, Israel experienced a decisive period. Though discreet at first glance, the Persians governed with a tolerant administrative policy, allowing each people to keep their religion and their laws, something essential for the survival of Judaism in a time marked by prophetic silence. With no direct religious persecution and no cultural imposition, Judea could reorganize its spiritual life after the return from exile, preserving the temple, the priesthood, and the scriptures in a relatively stable environment. This stability, however, produced a significant internal effect. The law began to occupy the absolute center of Jewish life. With the absence of prophets, the interpretation of the scriptures became the main authority in national and religious decisions. It is during this period that structures are solidified, which would later directly influence the debates found in the Gospels, the formation of teachers of the law, and the increasing importance of interpretive traditions began discreetly, yet profoundly, to reshape Jewish thought. Politically, Persian rule allowed Israel to keep its identity, but not its freedom. They were still a people subject to a foreign empire, a tension that fed the expectation of divine intervention promised by Malachi. The promise of the messenger who would come before the Messiah remained the only thread of hope, especially because there were no new signs, visions, or revelations. God did not speak, but he moved the nations, and when Persian power began to weaken, the stage was set for the entry of a figure who would change not only borders, but the very culture of the ancient world. The rise of Alexander the Great marks an abrupt turning point in the history of the ancient world, and Israel is swept to the center of this movement. When the young Macedonian king defeated the Persian Empire, the political map was reshaped almost overnight. Yet the deepest impact was not military, but cultural. With Alexander came Hellenism, a force that not only governed territories, but sought to shape minds, customs, language, and worldview. Judea, now under Greek rule, faced a completely new challenge. Maintaining its identity amid a culture promoting philosophy, sports, mythology, and a way of life opposed to biblical faith. And it is precisely this external pressure that began to divide the people themselves. Some viewed Hellenism as progress, others as a spiritual threat. These internal tensions would become seeds for the groups that would later directly influence the setting of the New Testament. At the same time, God used Alexander's advance for something extraordinary: the linguistic unification of the Mediterranean world. Koine Greek, imposed as the common language, would later allow the message of the gospel to reach borders quickly and accurately. Without knowing it, Alexander prepared the ground for the fullness of time. The expansion of roads, the founding of cities, and the circulation of ideas made the world more connected, exactly the kind of environment in which the revelation of the Messiah would spread with unprecedented reach. The conquests of Alexander did not bring immediate persecution to the Jews, but inaugurated a new phase of profound cultural transformations. Hellenism, now present in daily life, would be the dominant force of the following centuries, and would serve as the stage for decisive conflicts shaping Israel's faith until the rise of the promised messenger. But before that, the Greek Empire itself would fracture, opening space for internal struggles that would directly affect Jerusalem. With the sudden death of Alexander, the vast Greek Empire loses its unity immediately. His generals, the Diadochi, divide the territory among themselves, ushering in a period of instability that affects Israel directly. Judea becomes disputed by two Hellenistic powers, the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria. This struggle turns the region into a strategic corridor where each empire seeks to impose political and cultural influence. Under the Ptolemies, Judea experiences a degree of tolerance, though set within an environment strongly marked by Hellenism. The Jewish elite begins adopting Greek customs, while others resist fiercely, seeing this as a departure from their ancestral faith. This internal division deepens with the passing of the decades and prepares the ground for religious and identity conflicts that would become central in the centuries ahead. When control finally shifts to the Seleucids, the atmosphere changes drastically. The new power does not merely want to govern, it wants to unify. The Seleucids, driven by an aggressive vision of Hellenization, see Jewish distinctiveness as a political obstacle. Judea becomes a target of intensified pressure, creating rising tension between Jews leaning toward Hellenism and those striving to preserve the law with strict fidelity. These conflicts are not merely political, they are spiritual. Here lie the first roots of the divisions that would later result in movements such as the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and even the future Zealots. The absence of prophets continues, but the crisis forces the people to reflect on their identity. How far could they adapt without losing their essence? How far could coexistence with Hellenism advance without violating what made them the people of the covenant? In the context of growing Greek influence, a singular event profoundly marks biblical history: the translation of the Hebrew Scriptures into Koine Greek, known as the Septuagint. Produced in Alexandria under the rule of the Ptolemies, this translation arises from a practical need. Many Jews of the diaspora no longer mastered Hebrew, but becomes, without their realizing it, one of the most decisive instruments of the divine plan in the intertestamental period. The Septuagint accomplishes something unprecedented. It places the revelation of God in a language accessible to the whole world. What once belonged only to the Hebrew people now circulates among Greeks, Egyptians, Syrians, and other nations. This fact, seemingly cultural, creates a direct link between the centuries of prophetic silence and the future proclamation of the gospel. When the apostles later cite the Scriptures, they will do so mainly from this version, showing how God was already preparing the ground for a universal message. Furthermore, the translation exposes Israel to a broader reading of its own faith amid Hellenism. The coexistence between the Greek worldview and biblical revelation intensifies debates about identity, law, messianism, and tradition. Internal tension among Jewish groups grows. Some welcome Greek intellectual influence. Others view it as a threat to religious purity. Even so, it is undeniable that the Septuagint preserves Jewish faith in a world increasingly shaped by Greek language and culture. On a spiritual level, this linguistic advance prepares the scene for something greater: the circulation of the Word in a language that the New Testament itself would later use. When Paul, Peter, and other disciples proclaim Christ throughout territories controlled by the Roman Empire, the message will reach a people already familiar with the Scriptures, because the foundation was laid here, in this period of transition. The rise of Antiochus IV Epiphanes to the Seleucid throne inaugurates one of the darkest and most decisive periods in Jewish history. Unlike previous rulers, his intention was not merely to administer territories, it was to erase identities. Obsessed with Hellenism, Antiochus saw the Jewish faith as an obstacle to the cultural unity of his empire. And thus he decided to do the unthinkable: attack directly the religion, practices, and soul of the chosen people. By his decree, circumcision was forbidden, the Sabbath criminalized, and the law became a direct target of destruction. Copies of the Scriptures, when found, were burned. The temple in Jerusalem, the heart of the faith, was desecrated with impure sacrifices, and an altar dedicated to Zeus was erected in the holy place. Many Jewish historians would record this act as the abomination of desolation, language that later echoes the prophetic visions of Daniel. It is one of the moments when the conflict between political power and spiritual fidelity reaches its height. The people, divided since the arrival of Hellenism, now found themselves forced to choose: obey the king or obey God. Entire families were killed for refusing to abandon the law. The number of martyrs grew, and each loss heightened the contrast between Seleucid tyranny and the conviction of those who refused to deny the God of Israel. Amid this suffering, it becomes evident that prophetic silence does not mean divine absence. It prepares resistance. For when all political and cultural structures try to suffocate faith, a flame rises in the heart of Judea, one that would soon ignite a revolt capable of altering the course of history. The oppression of Antiochus IV Epiphanes reaches such an extreme that it awakens an unexpected response within Judea, a revolt led by a priestly family known as the Maccabees. When Mattathias, an elder of Modin, refuses to sacrifice to the Greek gods and kills the Seleucid emissary who tried to force him, this isolated act triggers a national movement that quickly gains strength, not as an ordinary war, but as a struggle for the spiritual survival of Israel. Under the command of Judas Maccabeus, son of Mattathias, the resistance takes shape. Judas becomes a symbol of courage, using guerrilla tactics to confront a far more powerful army. Even so, the revolt is not merely military, it is theological. Its central goal is to restore the temple, recover the law, and break the religious oppression imposed by the radical Hellenism of the Seleucids. Each victory seems to demonstrate that, even amid prophetic silence, God had not forsaken his people. The climax of this movement is the recapture of Jerusalem and the purification of the temple. The profaned altar is torn down and rebuilt, and the priestly service resumes according to the law. This event is celebrated to this day in the Feast of Hanukkah, which commemorates the dedication of the temple and the restoration of worship. It is as if Israel, after decades of cultural pressure and religious persecution, could breathe again as the people of the covenant. The Maccabean revolt does more than restore religious freedom. It inaugurates a period of Jewish autonomy and opens the way for the future Hasmonean dynasty. Yet at the same time, it leaves deep marks. It intensifies internal divisions between those who supported Hellenism and those who defended the law, preparing the ground for the religious conflicts that would become evident in the days of Jesus. With the victory of the Maccabees and the purification of the temple, a new political chapter is born, the Hasmonean dynasty. For the first time since the Babylonian exile, Israel once again enjoys full autonomy under Jewish rule. At first, this period represents a remarkable achievement. After decades of oppression, the people can finally restore their institutions, expand their borders, and strengthen the religious identity that had been threatened by Hellenism. However, this independence brings unexpected challenges. The alliance between political power and priestly authority, something originally separated in the biblical structure, begins to blur. Hasmonean rulers accumulate both priestly and royal functions, causing internal tensions and questions of legitimacy. This scenario directly contributes to the rise and strengthening of groups such as the Pharisees and Sadducees, who now dispute the interpretation of the law and the spiritual direction of the people. Thus, Judea experiences outward independence, but increasingly deep internal conflict. At the same time, the influence of Hellenism does not disappear. Part of the Hasmonean elite adopts Greek customs, while another part resists. This internal clash fuels divisions that would deeply shape the context of the Gospels. The Essenes, for example, withdraw entirely from public life, seeking extreme purity in response to what they considered the corruption of the temple. Meanwhile, the Zealots begin to emerge as a militant reaction to foreign domination, a mentality that would later intensify under the Roman yoke. Despite these tensions, territorial expansion and prosperity grow. Judea regains significant political presence in the region. Yet as it expands, it once again becomes a target for greater powers. As Rome advances across the Mediterranean, The fate of the Hasmonean dynasty approaches a critical point. Internal conflicts and disputes for the throne open the door for foreign interference, and it is precisely through this breach that the Roman Empire steps in, ending the recently regained autonomy and inaugurating a phase that would permanently reshape the setting for the coming of the Messiah. The arrival of the Roman Empire in Judea does not occur through direct invasion, but through an internal crisis within the Hasmonean dynasty itself. A dispute for the throne leads two brothers to seek help from Pompey, the Roman general, opening the door to what would become one of the most defining periods in Jewish history. In 63 BC, Pompey enters Jerusalem, ends Israel's political independence, and transforms the region into a territory subordinated to Rome. From that moment on, every dimension of Jewish life becomes shaped by the weight of imperial authority. Rome governs Judea with rigor and pragmatism. Heavy taxes, constant military presence, and interference in priestly leadership become daily realities. Although Rome allows some religious freedom, it makes clear that any attempt at independence will be crushed. It is in this climate that tensions between the people and their rulers grow increasingly intense. And it is also in this context that Herod emerges, appointed king by the Romans, a ruler of great political skill, but deeply feared and rejected by the Jewish population. Under Herod, Judea experiences a paradox. On one hand, he rebuilds the temple with unmatched grandeur, making it one of the most impressive structures of the ancient world. On the other hand, he governs with an iron fist, executing opponents, manipulating alliances, and enforcing Roman authority with brutality. This blend of religious splendor and political oppression intensifies messianic expectation. Many Jews look for the divine intervention promised by the prophets, as if the very weight of the empire were the catalyst for deliverance. In this setting, the internal groups, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots, become even more distinct. Each interprets the situation in its own way, some seeking purity, others seeking power, others armed resistance. Meanwhile, the world is, without noticing, being aligned for the greatest spiritual turning point in history. Roman roads connect continents. Koine Greek remains the universal language, and Judea lives in religious fervor. All essential factors for the message of the future Messiah to spread rapidly. After centuries of waiting, in a time when the Roman Empire controls every aspect of Judea, and when religious groups are deeply divided, something extraordinary happens. The prophetic silence is finally broken, not by a king, not by a priest, not by a military leader, but by a voice echoing in the wilderness, a simple, direct, uncompromising voice. This is how John the Baptist emerges, the messenger promised by Malachi who would prepare the way before the Lord. Malachi 3:1. John does not appear to announce himself. He announces repentance. His presence stands in stark contrast to everything around him. Rome displays its power. Herod rules with brutality. Pharisees and Sadducees struggle for authority. Essenes isolate themselves, and Zealots burn with resentment against foreign rule. John, however, aligns with none of these paths. His call is spiritual, urgent, and unmistakably clear. Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The impact is immediate. Multitudes descend to the Jordan seeking baptism, not as a new ritual, but as a sign of return to the covenant, rekindling something Israel had not experienced in centuries, living divine direction. His figure bridges the immense gap left since the days of Malachi, The words he proclaims act as a link between everything Israel had lived since the end of the Old Testament. From the Hellenism of Alexander and the Septuagint, which opened the world to the Scriptures, to the resistance of the Maccabees and the rigid rule of Rome. Each stage had prepared the cultural, political, and linguistic ground for this moment. John becomes the first beacon after the long night. Yet his mission is not to be the center. It is to point to someone greater. When he declares, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness," Isaiah 43, John publicly assumes the role the prophets had foretold. He is the messenger who marks the end of the interval between the covenants. The intertestamental period concludes in his person. And when he finally sees Jesus approaching, he seals his mission with words that would echo forever. "Behold, the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world." John 1:29. With John the Baptist, the silence ends. The fullness of time arrives, and history is finally ready for the entrance of the Messiah. This channel exists to deliver deep, completely free content about the Word, and this is only possible thanks to generous people like you. If you want to walk with us, become a member or share this video so that more lives may be reached. Your participation makes all the difference.